So this is the last installment of social psychology. Learning objectives for this section. Talk about stereotypes, 4 ways in which they can be harmful. Talk about these concepts of perceptual confirmation, self-fulfilling prophecy, and stereotype threat, and examples of how to reduce unconscious stereotyping. We'll talk about attributions, contrasting situational and dispositional attributions, and the actor-observer effect. So stereotypes, there's inferences about someone based on what group, what category they belong to. This isn't necessarily something that leads to discrimination and bias. It is a helpful process, but can sometimes produce harmful results. It's definitely very useful to make inferences about somebody based on some characteristics that they have that places them in some categorization. For example, if you're in a foreign country, you can often safely assume that most people there do not speak your language, even though they may very well do that. That's usually a safe assumption to start with, and it's helpful because you'll adapt in that way. You also can infer that somebody is a child, and therefore you know that they shouldn't be drinking alcohol or whatever it is. Okay, so this is often something that's helpful, but it can be harmful, of course. So how they can be harmful is they can be inaccurate, they can be overused, self-perpetuating, and also they're unconscious and automatic, which makes this a significant challenge for social psychologists. And many social psychologists are focused on stereotypes and how to mitigate their harmful effects. This is an activity that we would normally do, just thinking through examples of how each of these occur. So review the text on that. So inaccuracy. Here's an example of a study. There were 2 different groups of people, Group A and Group B, fictional groups, and participants observed these fictional groups of people engaging in positive and negative behaviors. Now, Group A was a majority group, and Group B was a minority group. I don't know if they were actually portrayed as like minority races as exist in our society, but there were just a whole lot more Group A folks than Group B, and they committed bad acts at the same rate. So you can see each had a 1 in 3 chance of committing a bad act. However, participants incorrectly reported that the Group B members were worse on average, that they engaged in the negative behavior more frequently than Group A. So just how our brains compute these kind of things, if it's a smaller group, even if bad behaviors are committed at the same rate, we tend to overestimate the percentage of bad behaviors that occur. An interesting idea that we often tend to have is that they in the out group are all the same, but we in our group are very diverse. So we tend to underestimate the variability within a category, and overestimate the variability between categories. And this is an interesting study, just looking at lengths of lines. So you can see that 1, 2, and 3, 4, 5, and 6, they're all different. And you can get a clear picture of the differences here. If they're put into groups, Group A and Group B, participants tend to overestimate the similarity between 1, 2, and 3, those within the group, and they underestimate the similarity between lines 3 and 4. They appear to be more different from each other than they actually are if they're put into those 2 groups. These are some examples of how stereotypes can be self-perpetuating. So the perceptual confirmation, that's basically seeing what we expect to see. There's a study done in which participants listen to a sports broadcast on the radio, and some there comments, commentary made about a player in an athletic match, And some listeners were led to believe that a certain player was white, and others led to believe that he was black. And ratings of athletic ability and intelligence were different based on the raters' beliefs, even though the broadcast was the exact same. The participants rated those things differently, so tending to confirm what we expect to perceive. Self-fulfilling prophecy. This is just a silly cartoon I found. This is that people behave as they're expected to behave. So if there's some stereotype that's held about a certain group that you belong to, sometimes you will actually fulfill that stereotype, and that's called the self-fulfilling prophecy. Related to this is what's called stereotype threat, is that fear of confirming negative beliefs. This study showed that if students were required to indicate their race on a standardized exam, they performed differently, and this is corrected for SAT score. That's taken into account in this. You can see that African American individuals perform significantly worse on the exam if they were required to list their race first. Whereas if they didn't, they actually performed a little bit better, or about the same, as European American students. Stereotypes tend to be unconscious and automatic, and we may be stereotyping even when we're trying not to, and we may not even be aware. There's a task called the camera or gun task, in which pictures are shown of white men and black men holding either cameras or guns, and the task is to click a button, which is to quote unquote shoot people who are holding guns and not shoot people who are holding cameras. And you have to make a quick reaction here, just a snap judgment, and sometimes it's in that amount of time, the amygdala is probably engaged in just that appraisal without that full processing occurring through the cortex, the full-scale investigation. So there's this tendency in this task for participants to shoot black men with cameras, which is an error, and not shoot white men with guns, which is another error. Now, interestingly, this result holds up whether the participants who are performing the task are black or white. How do we reduce unconscious stereotyping? Some methods that have been shown to be effective are exposure to examples of people who defy stereotypes. So like imagining you're in distress, rescued by somebody who you wouldn't expect because of stereotypes. I can't remember his name. It's Gene. Anyway, this man is described in your textbook. He, in the example of genuine altruism, in which he saved a white man who was having an epileptic seizure on the subway tracks. Saved his life at great risk to himself. So things like that, imagining situations like that and hearing stories like that help to defy stereotypes. Less effective things are just trying to see the world from a minority's perspective, or encouragement to feel compassion. So attributions, these are inferences about the causes of someone's behavior. Why is somebody doing what they're doing, or what are their motives? So situational attributions are when we attribute someone's behavior to the situation. That it's just luck, good luck or bad luck. Dispositional attributions, we believe that someone is behaving in a certain way or has what they have because of more enduring tendencies like traits and characteristics. So we tend to make situational attributions for our own behaviors and dispositional attributions for the behaviors of others. So this is kind of that, person situation controversy. If we're speeding down the freeway, if we're going down the freeway and somebody cuts us off in traffic, we tend to think, oh, they did that because they're a jerk, and that's a bad person who did that. So that's a dispositional attribution. If we cut somebody off in traffic, we think, oh, I'm not a bad person, but I'm just in a huge rush, and just this particular situation means that I have to cut people off. So this is known as the actor-observer effect, that we tend to have this bias towards attributing behavior to the situation versus to the disposition. Another example I forgot to mention. So yeah, like wealth, for example. If somebody has a lot of wealth, a situational attribution would be, oh, they were born into it. It's just because their family is wealthy. A dispositional attribution would be, oh, they're rich because they're good at managing money, or they have a good work ethic, things like that. So just make sure you're able to recognize examples of each of those. Okay, and there's image credits.